watched a an old movie, not as old as some of the others I watched recently, but relatively old now. I mean, it's not recent at least, and it's the protagonist was yeah I watched Last Action Hero, I think it's called. So yeah, the protagonist, not Schwarzenegger himself. He is much older now. He was 40 at that point, I think. He's about 70 now. So protagonist though, the child protagonist was 12, and now he is 40, and apparently a wedding photographer. Huh. Mm, don't personally think it's an incredibly exciting career, but okay. Okay. So, yeah, I don't know what it is. So, you know, um, I mean, I personally liked it. I clearly liked it more than critics liked it. But then I don't quite get. I mean, you know, this says it was a commercial failure, but it still seemed to have made profit. So I'm not exactly sure how it's a commercial failure. At least, unless the budget was more than is listed. Seems to still have made with regards to its rating. It doesn't seem to be rated too badly either. I mean, it's not exactly a masterpiece, but it's better than. I mean, I don't know why Arnold himself considered to be like I read that he considered to be the beginning of the end of his career as such. It's absurd. I don't know what um, yeah reception it had back then. But it's a real pity because I don't know why. I mean, many directors say action movies are well, I mean they are generally at least profitable at the very least. Even if I mean I don't think generally there are many that are critically well received, but still they usually are still profitable. So I think this one was profitable unless the numbers are somehow skewed for some reason, or the whole picture isn't there, in which case I'm not sure why the numbers are as they are. But um, yeah, it's a pity though, because it's a meta action movie, it's a parody action movie, and parodies are always, no, not always, but they're usually clever. I like parodies. I watched, for example, the whole of Gintama, and that's a great parody. Parody of many things that I didn't even quite know either, but still makes a good parody regardless. Explanations. So yeah, this in terms this. I mean, the way everything was used, the way the script was utilized, I really like it. It's generally, I mean, in comparison to rom-coms, for example, as a standard for comedy specifically, there's no comparison, is there? Rom-coms in comparison are absolutely dreadful in terms of the comedy specifically, as in, how funny they can be. That potential is just just really fails. And in terms of the action, the potential of the action movie element is also. I mean, I don't care too much personally about that kind of element, but in combination with this sort of comedy, it's pretty good. And there were still a lot of guns. So, I cannot say, I really, really love it because there were a lot of guns, right? It's sort of similar to how I don't really like so much that it's not that I don't like at all, but Inception was based on Paprika, but while Paprika had a single gun, which was central to the plot, Inception had a million. I have no idea why. Why do they feel the need to just have a million guns? Oh, because it's probably Hollywood, even though it's directed by a British guy. But as usual, there's a bazillion guns. Yay! I don't think that it works very well. Especially if it's if it it's clearly based on paprika. I don't get the point. But they're just trying to outdo it as something, or I suppose sure enough, Americanize it. It makes no sense. Just well, um, that's why I don't even think uh, at all highly of it. It's not that I didn't like most of the CGI was pretty good. Anyway, that's Inception. So I'm just saying that similarly, I didn't like the fact there were so many guns. I mean, there are usually a lot of guns in action movies, especially American action movies, naturally. Uh, this being Hollywood, but well, it's the main reason, I suppose, why I do not think highly of them. I personally rate them really lowly usually. But this one specifically, though, I think more highly of, more relatively, in comparison to other action movies, because, of course, the comedy element specifically. If it had just the action on its own, then no, no, it's mediocre at best. I don't really care unless it has a good plot, Sure. There are some action movies that have good plots, very rare though. Uh, but this had comedy. This had good comedy. I'd like to watch more that have such sardonic sort of meta jokes and such. It's really pretty good. I mean, and I haven't seen the Seventh Seal yet, but it really sells it somehow. Maybe not too much because, of course, I realize it's about that one thing that is so fearsome, but um, it's interesting, the fact that it was played by acted acted by that guy. What's it called again? Of course, back then this is they must have used some makeup. He looked really old then. I mean, currently in the present he is old. Back then, though, he might have been slightly less old than that. I mean, he looked pretty old as on the whole, it's really good. They did go a bit too far sometimes with for example, the makeup for the blood at the end. There was quite a lot, and it was quite obviously not blood and such. So I mean, it was over the top in that sense. So was the death of his supposed uncle. You know how he died, with his mouth open. What the hell is this supposed to be? I mean, yeah, they're trying to parody a death, but he literally says, "And now I'm leaving" or something similar. So it's a bit too much, I thought, a bit over the top. It's not quite, and not quite as clever as the rest of the movie, I thought, anyway. So those were the weak points, I think. Other than that, though, I like the fact that, they even included a cartoon character, and they even included a black and white Humphrey Bogart. I mean, what's not to like about that? It's quite, I yeah, I I actually kind of want to search specifically for other movies that have such specifically combining cartoons along with I mean the fact that I really don't know if there are any other movies that combine not only cartoons, which I'm assuming um, well, I mean there are other movies, I'm pretty sure. In fact, there was something I commented on in the past, but it didn't quite combine in a similar manner. It just had them side by side, as in animated the some of the characters there, in the fantasy setting, but not quite within the physical world like this. I still liked all sorts of animation. Pitifully, though, there wasn't much of that. Just a few seconds really. But really, the cameo of Humphrey Bogart was just hilarious, really. I think you can barely see he was black and white at one point, but yeah. Um, so the story itself, though, is mediocre. I mean, it's just about just the same sort of action fear sort of thing. Another weak point of the movie was the fact that they really went over the top with the villain himself, so-called Ripper. So yeah, I realize now that the villain was called Ripper, and then at the end there was the Reaper. So yeah, um, they did go over the top with the makeup though. Um, I mean, yeah, it's like they're trying to tell the audience, yep, here's the villain. Look how ugly he is. Like seriously, I mean, come on, they did go over the top, you know. So you know, it's by no means perfect or anything. You know, if it didn't have those three in particular, you know, it would have been slightly better. But even then, you know, just calling someone though, you know, what did they say? The yeah, someone the fact or something, you know, and a lot of flatulent joke. You know, I don't consider those jokes really. Um, you know, I mean, then at the end, he said, you know, he just finished with you know, silent but deadly. I mean, that's kind of stupid to say, really. Just another, you know, low common denominated joke. But the thing with the oils, sort of, you know, semi exploding there was sort of interesting, I suppose, but not really. I don't know what kind of bomb that was, honestly. Um, yeah. But other than that, I mean, they didn't go too far with that, you know, like some movies can possibly do, and you know, and really be explicit about it or such, you know, that you know where you really feel disgusted, possibly. They didn't go too far. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, you know, it was interesting how the whole thing happened, you know, a lot of meta references and you know, talk of movies and um, yeah, it's certainly better than most non-meta action movies. I do appreciate such sort of, you know, it's almost like whenever there's a parody, you know, as long as it's not really somehow lowest common denominator as mentioned, you know, it's usually funny somehow. I mean, it's funnier than you know most direct comedy per se, you know, because when you direct, you know, I don't know, they sometimes they try too hard, sometimes you know, like Melissa McCarthy, you know, it just relies on pathetic sort of humor. I don't know why they do it, and most humor almost pales in comparison to um, parodic humor. I think it's is it parodic? Um, Parodies generally, though, yeah, are interesting because of course they and often, I mean, the best kind of parodies, just like with the Reaper at the end, I don't think people necessarily need to have watched it. I mean, it's pretty accessible still, you know, because obviously the Reaper does exist outside of the specific movie. So at least you know they chose someone who people you know generally know outside of specific you know. So it's not like you know some internal reference that only people who watch the movie get. But generally, parodies, I mean, good parodies at least, generally are accessible. And kind of like Gintama was in a way, even though it still relied on a lot of explanations and such. But it was still funny on its own. So I don't think there were many moments where you know it was there was supposed to be a joke, and so if you know since the audience might not know what the reference is to, then you know the joke doesn't really work at all. Usually the joke is basic to an extent that you know even though there's a reference, it's still funny. And I think most of the jokes in this movie could be said to be like that as well. I don't think they're generally too obscure or obtuse or just not really. I mean, depend too much on references. I think generally they're they don't really. They're generally accessible, and I mean, action movies don't tend to be the most sophisticated bunch anyway. So their meta descriptions really fit quite well. For I mean, it's sort of an early action movie by itself, you know. So I think most that I've watched were later on. But yeah, and in comparison to other action comedies specifically, like Jackie Chan's, which I think I commented in the past about also, I think I preferred this kind. Before I watched Kindergarten Cop from Schwarzenegger, and I liked it as well. They had some comedy. It wasn't meta, but it's so far, I think I prefer his action comedies rather than I don't know. Jackie Chan relies a lot on more physical sort of comedy as opposed to so more slapstick in a way. Then this was more word based comedy, which I appreciate more. I think generally. So yeah, I did generally like it. I did laugh a few times. Yeah.